Hey everyone, ever gone through something like this? Share a brief version, no names, in the comments. Stick around, the story starts now. I stepped off the small regional jet and breathed in the cold Minnesota air, the kind that stings and burns, like it's determined to remind you how far from home you are. The airport was small, barely bigger than a bus station. No one was here to greet me, just a couple of tired workers behind the counter and the usual crowd milling around. I felt every inch of the distance between where I was now and where I used to be. My family, always the picture of normalcy, of success, never thought much of me. My brother Ryan, he was the golden child, the one who did everything right, the one who didn't waste time. Me? I wasted years chasing a dream of being a U.S. Marshal, then pivoted to something even more impractical, according to them. A federal investigator. They didn't know I was a senior fraud investigator for the Treasury. They still thought I worked some low-level clerical job. That's the story I fed them year after year because it was easier than trying to explain the truth. Ryan, on the other hand, was a property developer, charismatic, always the life of the party. The man everyone believed could do no wrong. Hell, even when I left home to join the federal training program, he drove me to the bus station, and the whole time, he couldn't stop telling me how much I was wasting my time. He thought I was throwing away a future, chasing something that didn't matter. 23 years later, I was here, standing on the edge of the life he'd built, the life he was about to lose piece by piece. I pulled my coat tighter, made my way toward baggage claim. No one recognized me here. Good. Let them keep believing whatever they needed to. I wasn't going to be the one to shatter their illusion. Not yet. But soon enough, Ryan would find out that the last person he thought would be standing in his way had been doing just that for years. I slipped into the back of the courtroom and found an empty seat, tucked against the wall, as far from the front as I could manage. The low hum of quiet conversation filled the room, and I let it wash over me. No one would notice me back here, not right now anyway. Ryan's family was in the front row, as expected. His wife, Shannon, looked prim and perfect, her eyes trained forward, focused on whatever drama was unfolding. Ryan sat next to her, his usual cocky self, smiling like he hadn't a care in the world. His kids were beside them, still young enough to look confused, but not worried. My parents sat next to them too, looking calm, almost too calm, like they believed he'd walk out of this without a scratch. That's how they'd always been, convinced Ryan could talk his way out of anything. That same naive faith in him. They'd never seen it coming. None of them had. The judge entered, the murmurs died down, and the proceedings began. I stayed in the shadows, just another anonymous face in the crowd. The prosecutor stood, tall and poised, ready to make his case. He started slow, outlining the charges, his voice clear and deliberate. He began with the forged appraisals, the fake buyers, then moved to the shell companies Ryan had set up to launder the money. It was all business, cold, calculated. The prosecutor's voice grew more certain as he laid out the timeline of Ryan's real estate scam. A few of the details hit harder than I expected, especially when he talked about the families, innocent people who had lost their homes, their savings, their trust. The room went quiet as the prosecutor flashed up a few slides, showing emails, bank transfers, and the signatures that had been faked. Ryan's fingers, invisible but all over everything, had touched it all. And then, just when the evidence felt like it was too much to deny, the prosecutor revealed a slide that made my heart skip, a photo of my badge. It wasn't a generic law enforcement ID, it was mine, my real one. Special Agent Jessica O'Connell. The name on the badge flashed across the screen. I saw the shock hit my father like a punch to the gut. His face drained of color, and he blinked, staring at the photo, then at me. He had no idea. Mom froze, her eyes wide and unblinking, like she was waiting for someone to explain the mistake. The prosecutor didn't stop. He kept detailing the case, the investigation I had led for 2 years. My team's hard work, my name attached to all of it. That's when it all clicked. The pieces, the quiet doubts they'd kept pushing to the back of their minds, suddenly slammed together. My family finally understood I wasn't some low-level clerk who worked for the government. I was the one who brought this case down on Ryan. Ryan caught my eye for a second, and I felt a jolt in my chest, like someone had just lit a match in a dry room. His gaze didn't waver, but I could see the gears turning behind his eyes. He wasn't rattled yet, but I knew it was coming. He wanted to say something, but the prosecutor kept talking, laying out more evidence. The longer it went, the more I could feel my family's certainty slipping. One of Ryan's kids, a little boy, looked up at my parents, confused. He whispered, just loud enough for me to hear, "Aunt Jess?" My heart twisted. I didn't move. I just kept staring at my brother, letting the silence in the room stretch between us. Ryan's kids weren't stupid. They knew something was off. They had to. But my parents? They couldn't take their eyes off me. Neither could I take mine off them. I wanted to scream at them. I wanted to shout that I wasn't here to make their lives harder, that I wasn't here to ruin everything they thought they knew about the world. But instead, I just sat there, biting my tongue, waiting for the inevitable fallout. The prosecutor's voice cut through the room as he called me to the stand. My heart didn't skip a beat. It wasn't fear I felt, not in that moment. It was more like the calm before a storm, the weight of everything that had been building up over the past few years now coming to a head. I stood, feeling every set of eyes in the room lock onto me. The judge gestured for me to step forward, and I did, walking across the floor with the same slow, deliberate steps I'd taken 1,000 times before in similar courtrooms. But this was different. This was my family. I set my hands on the stand, the wood smooth under my fingertips, and I faced the prosecutor. "Special Agent Jessica O'Connell," he said, his voice steady as he made the formal introduction. "Can you confirm for the court that you led the investigation into the defendant's activities?" "Yes," I said, the words coming out like they were carved from stone. No hesitation. The room was silent, except for the faint sound of shuffling papers, the rustle of a few people shifting in their seats. I could feel my father's gaze on me. I didn't look at him. I couldn't. The prosecutor laid it all out. The timeline, the fraudulent appraisals, the shell companies, the offshore accounts, the fake buyers Ryan had created to cover his tracks. It was a perfect storm of deception, each piece more damning than the last. Every email, every transaction, every breadcrumb I had painstakingly gathered over the last 2 years was now on full display. I stayed composed, my posture straight, my expression neutral. Inside, though, it was a different story. Every moment, every fact, every lie Ryan had told felt like a slap, but I refused to let it show. Ryan shifted in his seat, trying to make eye contact. His stare was like a challenge, like he was daring me to break, to show any weakness. His lips pressed into a tight line, but he didn't speak. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. The prosecutor went on, more evidence spilling out. The witnesses who had been duped by Ryan's promises, the bank accounts he had funneled money through, the families he had left ruined. It was a sea of ruin, and Ryan had orchestrated it all. He had used his charm, his smooth talk, to steal from people who could barely afford to lose a dime. When it was over, I stepped back, my testimony concluded. The judge called for a break before moving on to the next part of the proceedings. The courtroom filled with murmurs, people shifting in their seats. I returned to my spot at the back, but my eyes never left my family. Ryan was handcuffed now, his wrists bound in the stark metal cuffs that would mark the end of his freedom. His family huddled around him like he was still untouchable, like he was still their golden boy. But there was no escaping this. No charm, no smile, no amount of talking his way out of it. It was over. My parents stood off to the side, their faces pale, eyes wide. I could see the confusion, the disbelief. They hadn't just learned their son was guilty of something illegal. They had learned that I was the one who put him there. The realization was written all over their faces. I didn't move. I didn't approach. They didn't try to approach me either. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw Lindsay, my niece. She was 17 now, her face still soft with the last remnants of childhood, but her expression was full of questions. She hesitated, glanced at her parents, then walked toward me, a mix of hesitation and curiosity in her step. When she got close enough, she stopped and looked at me, searching my face as if she could find all the answers there. "Aunt Jess?" she asked, her voice small, unsure. Is all of this true?" I didn't have to ask her what she meant. She meant the case, the fraud, everything that had come to light. I nodded once, slowly, and met her eyes. "I've been a senior federal fraud investigator for over 2 decades, I said, my voice low. "I've been doing this work a long time. And yes, it's true." She didn't say anything right away. She just stared at me, her lips parted, her brow furrowed like she was trying to piece it all together. I could see the shock on her face, but I also saw the curiosity creeping in, the same curiosity I'd seen in her when she was younger, before Ryan's world had started to overshadow everything. She had never asked me about my work, never questioned why I always kept things vague when it came to my job. But now, the truth was out there. She was starting to see me for who I really was. I didn't know, she said quietly, almost to herself, as if the realization had just hit her. I thought, I thought you just worked in an office. I smiled. Just a little, but it was a tight smile, one that didn't reach my eyes. I don't work in an office, Lindsay. I work to put people like your dad away. Her eyes flickered with something, maybe realization, maybe fear, but she didn't pull away. She just nodded slowly. I had no idea, she whispered. I placed a hand on her shoulder. It's a lot to take in, I know. She nodded again, her eyes still fixed on me. She didn't know what to say. Neither did I. But I wasn't going anywhere. Not now. Not after everything that had happened. I didn't have to look at my parents to know they were waiting for me. I could feel the weight of their eyes, even as I stood by the courthouse doors. Ryan had been escorted out, handcuffed, and my family had remained huddled together, stunned, speechless. Then my father's voice cut through the noise of the crowd. Jessica, we need to talk. I turned slowly, met their eyes. My mother looked like she might faint, her cheeks pale, her hand shaking as she gripped my father's arm. I knew what they wanted to say. I'd been expecting this. Still, it didn't make it any easier. We can't do this here, I said, holding up a hand. 20 minutes, that's all you get. I turned and led them to a nearby diner, the kind that served greasy fries and burgers, the kind where time felt like it slowed down. The smell of fried food and coffee hit me as soon as we walked through the door. It was an old place, worn-out booths, cracked vinyl seats. I didn't want to spend any more time here than I had to, but this was where they wanted to meet, so this was where we'd have it out. We sat at a corner booth. My father was already fidgeting, his jaw clenched tight. He had that angry look on his face, like he was trying to keep it all in, but couldn't quite manage. My mom sat next to him, her eyes red, tears still fresh on her face. She didn't speak. She just stared at me, waiting for some kind of explanation. I waited too. The silence was thick, like it was going to choke us both. Finally, my father broke the silence. You couldn't have just let it go, could you? His voice was low but harsh. I could see the confusion in his eyes, the anger that was bubbling just below the surface. Your family, Jess? He's your brother. I leaned forward, elbows on the table. I didn't want to do this, I said, my voice flat, tired. But Ryan didn't give me much of a choice. His eyes flickered, a flash of doubt, maybe even guilt. But it wasn't enough. He was still struggling with it, still trying to rationalize what Ryan had done. All these years, my father's voice cracked. All these years, you could have come to us. You could have told us. And you would have what? I shot back, my patience wearing thin. You would have believed me? I didn't give him a chance to answer. I was already moving on. Ryan stole millions of dollars from low-income families. He lied, manipulated mortgage documents, and laundered the money through shell companies. All of it. It's not a mistake. It's not a misunderstanding. It's fraud. Criminal fraud. The words landed like a slap, and my father recoiled as if I'd hit him physically. The anger in his eyes morphed into something else, something almost broken. But he's your brother, he repeated, his voice low, pleading. And he's a criminal? I shot back, my voice cutting through the space between us. I could feel the weight of it, the weight of what I was saying, the truth of it. But it was out now, and I wasn't taking it back. A criminal who hurt people, people who trusted him. The room seemed to hold its breath, the sound of a distant bell ringing somewhere outside the diner like a reminder that life was still moving forward, even if we weren't. My mother finally spoke, her voice so small, so fragile, it almost made me flinch. How could you do this to us, Jess? She whispered, her eyes welling up again. How could you do this to him? To your family? I looked at her, at both of them, trying to hold their gaze. It was harder than I thought it would be, but I didn't look away. Because I couldn't let him do this to anyone else, I said, my voice quieter now, but no less firm. You want to know why I never told you the truth? Why I never told you what I do? Because you'd never understand? Because it's easier to believe that Ryan could do no wrong than to face the truth. And I'm not going to protect him anymore. There was a long silence after that, the air thick with everything unsaid. My father's fists were clenched on the table now, his knuckles white, but he didn't say anything else. My mother wiped her eyes and looked down at the table, as though she couldn't bear to meet my gaze. I could see the shift in them. They were still in shock, still processing the fact that their son, their perfect, golden son, was going to prison. But more than that, they were wrestling with the fact that I was the one who put him there. We sat there for a while, neither of us speaking, just absorbing the weight of what had been said. Finally, my father stood, his face pale, the fight gone out of him for the moment. 20 minutes, he muttered. That's all we get? I nodded. That's all you get. He turned and walked toward the door, leaving the booth behind. My mother stood up after him, her steps slower, more hesitant, like she wasn't sure how to leave me or how to say what she needed to. Jess, she said softly, her voice shaking, I just don't understand how you could choose this. I didn't answer. There was nothing more to say. We sat in silence for a while after my parents left, the weight of everything lingering between us. I stayed at the table, staring at the coffee cup in front of me, my fingers tracing the rim. The dull clink of silverware and hushed voices from nearby tables were a reminder that the world hadn't stopped moving, hadn't even slowed down. My mom's voice broke the quiet first, soft, as if she wasn't sure how to begin. Jess, I didn't know. I didn't know what you were really doing all this time. I didn't lift my eyes from the cup. You never asked. She seemed to shrink a little, her shoulders slumping as she folded her hands in front of her on the table. I didn't think you'd keep it from us. I didn't think it was that big a deal. I let out a bitter laugh, not even looking at her. Yeah, you didn't think. You never thought. Every time I tried to explain, you'd change the subject or say it was too complicated. You'd ask about my job in an office and then go on about how I should settle down and get a real career. Do you remember that? I finally lifted my gaze to hers. She looked guilty, but there was no apology in her eyes, just confusion and a little bit of hurt. She never really believed in me. She never saw me as someone capable of doing anything other than working in an office or being content with something safe, something normal. I remember the time I told you I was being stationed abroad for an audit operation. I went on, my voice sharper now. And your first question was if I was thinking about settling down. Like that was the most important thing in my life. Not the work, not the fact that I was being trusted with something big, just whether I'd found a husband. She looked down at her hands, her lips trembling. I never meant to make you feel like that. I just wanted what was best for you. I know you thought you were doing what was best, I said, my voice quieter now. But you never bothered to ask about what I wanted. You never thought I was capable of anything outside the mold you had in your head for me. And it hurt more than you think. My mother didn't say anything to that. She just sat there, the tears welling in her eyes again. I hated seeing her like this, but it wasn't going to change anything. I didn't think you'd succeed, my dad had once admitted, not long before I left for training. It wasn't just that he didn't believe in me. It was that he'd never thought I'd make it. He'd always been too focused on his own idea of success, his own plans for me. And now, here I was, the sister who had gone off to do something completely different, and the one who was forced to turn on her own flesh and blood. I thought it was a phase, she whispered, more to herself than to me. I thought you'd outgrow it. I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed. And Ryan? You thought he would outgrow all of this? She went quiet again. The answer was obvious. She'd never thought he would do anything wrong, never questioned him, never thought he was capable of betrayal. That's when Lindsay appeared, standing at the edge of the booth like she wasn't sure if she should join us. Her eyes flickered between me and my mom. Hey, Aunt Jess, do you mind if I sit down? I smiled, the edges of it tight. Of course, sit. She slid into the seat beside me, her eyes wide with curiosity. She was still in that stage where everything felt like it was up for grabs, where she was starting to realize that things weren't always black and white. So, Lindsay started, her voice almost hesitant. What do you actually do? I mean, I know you're with the government, but I didn't have to think about it. I investigate financial crimes. I track down fraud. That means I look for the scams people run to steal from others, like the one your dad was running. She absorbed that, her brow furrowing as she took it in. But how do you find out if someone's lying with paperwork? How do you even start? It was clear that Lindsay didn't see me as some mysterious figure anymore. She was really asking, really wanting to understand. The questions came fast, one after the other, like she couldn't wait to learn more. First, you gather the evidence, I explained. Emails, transaction records, anything that ties a person to the crime. Then you start putting it all together. You have to be patient. People like Ryan don't make mistakes unless you catch them at the right moment. They're careful. They lie about everything. Wow. She blinked, clearly impressed. I didn't realize how much goes into it. I always just thought, I don't know. I guess I thought it was more detective-y, you know? I couldn't help but laugh. It's not as glamorous as TV makes it out to be, but yeah, there's a lot of legwork, a lot of waiting. Her face lit up a little, like she'd just had a glimpse of a whole new world. It was the first time since I'd walked into this mess that I felt a sense of connection, like I hadn't completely destroyed the person I used to be to them. I think that's cool, Lindsay said quietly. I didn't realize how important it all is. It's kind of amazing. I felt a shift then, a small one. Not a full acceptance, but maybe the first real spark of understanding. Maybe you'll be the one asking those questions one day. She smiled at that. The hurt from my parents still sat heavy, but this moment felt different. I wasn't alone in all of this. Maybe not yet in the way I needed, but I wasn't going to have to explain myself to Lindsay the way I'd always had to with them. Not anymore. The conversation shifted in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't smooth. It wasn't perfect. But there was a change. My father cleared his throat, still not fully able to meet my eyes. So, you really work on cases like this all the time? I nodded, my hands wrapped around the mug of coffee, the heat seeping through my fingertips. Yes, Dad. Fraud investigations. It's what I do. Day in, day out. He paused, thinking it over. Then, without the usual condescension I'd gotten used to, he asked, "What's it like?" I mean, it's got to be hard. Seeing what people do to each other. I looked over at him. It was the first time he had asked something like that. Not in a dismissive way. Not in a, well, you're just a girl way. It was real curiosity. It's brutal, honestly, I said, my voice quiet now, a little more reflective. I've seen some things that make you question humanity. There was this one case, a group of people running a fraud ring for years. They manipulated mortgage documents and used the money to fund their own little empire, leaving families out in the cold. I spent months going through their books, tracking every penny. Lindsay, who had been quietly watching me, leaned forward slightly, her eyes wide. She was hanging on every word. Maybe she was finally seeing something she'd missed before, something bigger than just the family drama. It took a toll, I continued, not wanting to sugarcoat it. There's a weight to it. When you see what people will do for a buck, it sticks with you. But I wouldn't trade it for anything. I'm proud of the work I've done. I'm proud of the people I've helped. My mother, who had been quiet up to this point, looked down at the table, her fingers twisting the napkin in front of her. I should have known, she said, her voice quieter than before. I should have seen. You were always so determined. And I pushed you toward teaching, or, well, something softer. I always thought you'd be happier doing something more feminine, I guess. I wasn't surprised by the apology, though it stung a little to hear it. She wasn't apologizing for not believing in me. She was apologizing for not trying harder to shape me into what she thought I should be. It's not your fault, Mom, I said, softening my tone. You did what you thought was right. But I needed something else. She didn't answer right away, just nodded, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. I didn't feel the need to add more. She had her own regrets to work through. Do you ever think about leaving it all behind? My father asked next, his voice almost tentative now. I mean, this work, it sounds exhausting. All that stress, the emotional toll, do you think it's worth it? I considered the question. There were days I wondered if it was all too much. Days where I thought I might want to quit and do something easier. But that wasn't who I was. I can't, I said finally. It's not always easy, but it's what I'm good at. And it matters. Helping people who've been screwed over, it matters. Lindsay sat quietly, absorbing everything. She hadn't said much, but I could see her thinking, processing. Her eyes darted between me and my parents. She seemed so young, still on the edge of figuring out who she wanted to be, but maybe, just maybe, she was seeing things a little differently now. Could I ask you something? Lindsay finally spoke up, her voice steady, but there was a quiet curiosity behind it. Do you think, if I wanted to do something like you, like with fraud and money, do you think I could? I mean, do you need to be a certain type of person? I wasn't sure if she was testing the waters or if she was genuinely asking, but I took a deep breath. You can be whoever you need to be, Lindsay, I said, offering her a reassuring smile. You just need to be willing to work for it. If you want to learn about finance, law, forensics, you can. You can do whatever you set your mind to. It's just not going to be easy. But if you care about it, you'll make it work. Lindsay smiled, a little shy but clearly intrigued. I've always wondered what it'd be like. Maybe I'll look into it. There was a long silence after that, but something had shifted. The wall wasn't gone, not by a long shot, but the cracks were starting to show. It wasn't full acceptance, not yet, but it was a start. I'd like to meet again before I leave, I said, breaking the quiet. Maybe we can try to figure this out. My father, for the first time, looked me in the eye and gave a small nod. We'll figure it out, he said, his voice hoarse but sincere. And maybe we would. Maybe we could start over, build something different, even if it was built from the rubble of everything that had just happened. The next day, I was sitting at a cafe, nursing a cup of coffee, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Lindsay. Can we talk? I stared at the message for a second, then typed a quick reply. Sure, where? Her response came almost immediately. Bookstore in town. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I wasn't sure what this conversation would look like, but I wasn't about to ignore it. I grabbed my bag and made my way out of the cafe. It was a quiet day, and the bookstore smelled like paper and dust, the kind of place where you could lose yourself for hours. Lindsay was leaning against a shelf, her arms crossed, her face more serious than I'd seen her before. When she saw me, she stood up straight and waved me over. I joined her by the mystery section, and she didn't waste any time getting to it. I need to ask you something, she said, looking at me with a kind of vulnerability that I hadn't expected. Do you think Ryan is all bad? I took a deep breath. This was the question I'd been waiting for, the one I'd known would come eventually. No, I said slowly. Ryan's not all bad. No one is. But good people can still do terrible things. I paused, trying to find the right words. He's done a lot of damage. He made choices. He betrayed people who trusted him. That doesn't change just because he's my brother. Lindsay absorbed this, her eyes not leaving mine. It was clear she wasn't just processing the words. I could see the wheels turning in her head, the weight of the question pulling her in two directions. I don't know who to believe anymore, she admitted quietly. I always thought Dad was perfect. I thought he could do no wrong. But now everything's different. It's like, if Ryan could be a criminal, how do I even know who to trust? I feel like I don't understand anything anymore. I felt the weight of her words, the confusion in her voice. She wasn't just struggling with Ryan's actions, she was struggling with everything she had believed about her family, her life, her world. I know it's hard, I said, trying to offer some reassurance, but that's how con artists work. They fool people into believing there's something they're not. They're charming, they know how to make you trust them. Your dad, he's been fooled too, just like a lot of people. Lindsay shifted, her expression troubled. But what if he is perfect? What if he's just been wronged by everyone else? Her voice cracked slightly. What if we're all wrong about him? I met her gaze, trying to balance honesty with compassion. Lindsay, I get that you want to believe in him. I want to too, but sometimes people just aren't what we think they are. It doesn't mean everything we've built with them is a lie, but it can shatter what we thought was true. It's a hard truth to swallow, but we have to face it. She was quiet for a moment, looking down at her hands, twisting her fingers together. Then, after a long pause, she finally looked up at me again. I think I want to study forensic accounting, she said softly, almost to herself. Or maybe law, something that helps people figure this out, understand it, how people can hide things for so long. I couldn't help but smile at that. It was a small smile, but it was genuine. She was looking for something that mattered, something that gave her a way to process all of this. It was the first sign that she was trying to find a path that was her own, even if it was shaped by all this mess. Good, I said simply. If that's what you want, go for it. You'll find your way. She nodded, the hint of a smile touching her lips. Then she hesitated before speaking again. Will you keep in touch? I mean, I don't know. It feels like everything is changing so fast. I don't want to lose contact, just because of what's going on with, well, everything. It was a question I hadn't expected, but it was the right one. I wasn't sure where this relationship would go, where she and I would land after everything had settled, but I knew I wasn't walking away from her. I'll keep in touch, I said firmly. I promise. She smiled then, a little more brightly. There was a spark in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Maybe it was the first step in her finding her own voice, her own path. And maybe, just maybe, it meant that the foundation we had could be rebuilt. Slowly, carefully, but rebuilt nonetheless. We stood there for a while, not saying much, but the quiet was comfortable. Lindsay was figuring it out. I was too. And though we hadn't solved everything, it felt like we were both starting to look at the world a little differently. Finally, I broke the silence. I've got to head back to DC soon. Lindsay nodded, still processing everything. I'll figure things out, she said quietly, almost like a promise to herself. Good, I said again. Just don't rush it. There's time. We lingered for a moment longer, then headed toward the door together. A few days later, Ryan was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. The courtroom was packed, reporters hanging on every word, their cameras clicking like clockwork. Ryan didn't look surprised, just resigned. He didn't even flinch when the judge read the sentence. His wife, Shannon, was already halfway out the door by then, her face drained of color, her shoulders stiff with something that could have been shame or anger, or maybe both. That afternoon, the local paper hit the stands, and the headline screamed about the sentencing. Ryan's name was at the top, of course, and then in the lower half of the article, my name was mentioned once, buried under the details of the investigation. A single line that barely acknowledged my role in bringing it all down. It didn't matter. I wasn't looking for recognition. The justice was the point, not the glory. I had already seen Shannon's lawyer arrive with divorce papers. It wasn't a surprise. I didn't feel anything for her, not now. If anything, it felt like she was trying to save face, trying to put some space between her world and the wreckage Ryan had caused. As I sat in my hotel room that night, the weight of everything pressed down on me, like I'd been holding my breath for so long that it had finally caught up with me. I pulled my phone from my pocket and stared at the message from my dad. Hard day, but I'm proud of you. The words sat there, heavy and cold. I wasn't sure what to do with them. It wasn't an apology, wasn't a full understanding. But it was a start. He had seen something in me that wasn't just my job, wasn't just the badge. And maybe that was enough for now. I didn't reply right away. I didn't know how to. I wasn't ready for that conversation, not yet. Instead, I left my hotel and drove through town one last time. The streets felt too quiet, the lights too bright. I found myself passing familiar landmarks, the places that had once felt like home, like they belonged to me. But now it all felt foreign, like someone else's life. When I got to the house, I stopped. I parked across the street, just sitting there, staring at the place where I grew up. It looked the same, everything in place, like nothing had changed. But everything had. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach, in the tightness of my chest. The house wasn't home anymore. It hadn't been for years. I sat there for a long time, not sure what I was waiting for. Maybe closure, maybe an apology from the past that would never come. I didn't get out of the car, didn't knock, didn't try to talk to anyone. I just looked at the house, then turned the key and drove away, back toward DC, where the next chapter was waiting. The miles stretched out before me, the road ahead unfamiliar but necessary. The pain of what had happened, what I had lost, was still there, lingering like a bruise that would take time to heal. But I didn't feel the need to rush it. Maybe it was better this way, slow, steady, the weight of it all settling into something manageable. I didn't know if my family would ever truly understand what I had to do, but that was their burden, not mine. I had done what I could. I had kept the line between what was right and wrong clear, even when it meant losing pieces of myself. And so I drove, the familiar ache of unresolved grief settling into something softer, something I could live with. I got back to my DC apartment late in the evening, the familiar smell of coffee and old books greeting me as soon as I stepped inside. I dropped my bag by the door and stood there for a second, just taking it all in. The place felt like it always did, too quiet, too empty, but mine. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed it until I was back, but the weight of the past week was still on me. I hadn't quite shaken it off yet. I unpacked quickly, tossing clothes into drawers, putting everything in its place like I was trying to set my life back to normal. But normal felt like something distant now, like it belonged to someone else. My hands moved automatically, putting everything away, but my mind kept drifting to the trial, to my family, to everything that had shifted in ways I didn't quite understand yet. The phone buzzed as I sat down at my desk, still stacked with case files and reports. My boss had already emailed, commending me for the work on the Ryan case. He was glad to have it wrapped up, glad to see the department shine for once. It was all business, no real acknowledgement of what the case had cost me. I skimmed the email, then clicked open the new case file waiting for me. Another mess to untangle, another set of lies to track. But as I started to scroll through the details, I couldn't shake the feeling that this one wouldn't be the same. Not now. My family knew who I was. They knew what I did. I wasn't hiding anymore. There was no pretending I worked in some dull office job. I wasn't just a secretary anymore. I had made sure of that. A buzz from my phone interrupted my thoughts. It was a text from Lindsay. I opened it, expecting the usual, "How are you?" But what I saw made me stop. A selfie of Lindsay, smiling wide, standing in front of a classroom. Career day speech went great. Told everyone my aunt hunts white-collar criminals. I stared at the message for a second, the words sinking in. I hadn't expected this. She had done it. She had stood up in front of a group of kids and said it out loud. I hadn't asked her to, but there it was. Her way of showing me that maybe she was beginning to understand, beginning to see the work I did in a new light. I smiled, a real smile for the first time in days. It felt good, even if it was small. It felt like a crack in something that had been too tight for too long. I typed a quick reply. "I'm proud of you, kid. Keep going. Don't let anyone tell you what you can or can't do." I hit send, then leaned back in my chair, my fingers still on the keyboard. The world outside my apartment hadn't changed. The case I'd just wrapped up wasn't any different than the last one. But something had shifted. Not in the way things were. Things were still messy, still uncertain, but in the way I was seen, at least by Lindsay. Maybe by my family, too, eventually. I looked at the next case file, the one I was supposed to start working on, and realized that for the first time in a while, I wasn't dreading it. It wasn't that I liked the job more, it wasn't even that I was happy to be back, but for the first time, I wasn't hiding anymore. I wasn't running from the truth of who I was. It wasn't perfect. I wasn't whole, but it was a start. And maybe that was enough. I met my parents for coffee before my flight back to DC. We sat in a small, quiet cafe, tucked away in a corner like we were trying to avoid being noticed. They were different now, humbled in a way that felt strange to see. My father didn't carry the same air of superiority he once had. He looked older somehow, more tired, and his words were careful, like he was testing the ground beneath him, unsure of how much weight it could bear. "I thought I was protecting you from the world," he said, his voice lower than usual. "Turns out you were protecting it from people like your brother." I didn't respond right away. There wasn't anything to say. I wasn't angry anymore. I'd let that go a long time ago. I just nodded, meeting his eyes for a second before glancing down at my coffee. He was still trying to understand, and maybe, for the first time, he was starting to see the difference between protection and denial. My mother sat beside him, quieter than she'd been in the past, watching me with a kind of tenderness that felt almost foreign. She hadn't been able to say much the last time we talked, but now there was something softer in the way she looked at me. Less judgment, more understanding. When the conversation fell silent again, my father cleared his throat and leaned forward, his eyes searching mine. "You always did what you thought was right, didn't you? I didn't have to think about it. I'd always done what I thought was right, even when it cost me." "Yeah," I said, keeping it simple. "I did." A long silence passed between us, filled with everything unsaid. It wasn't a moment of full reconciliation, but it was something. A shift. A beginning, maybe? When it was time to leave, my mom stood up first, her eyes still glistening. She hesitated, then pulled me into a long, tight hug. It felt like a weight had been lifted, but I wasn't sure what had shifted. Maybe it was just her finally saying what had been stuck for years. "You were never a disappointment," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "We just didn't understand the kind of strength it took." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. She'd said enough. And maybe, just maybe, it was the start of us finding our way back to each other. I left them standing there, my mother still holding my dad's arm, and I made my way to the gate. My phone buzzed as I was about to board. A text from Lindsay. "Thank you for showing me what being strong really looks like." I stared at the message, feeling something warm settle in my chest. The words weren't just for her. They were for me, too. A reminder that even in the mess of it all, I had done something right. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I turned off my phone, slipping it into my bag, and took my seat on the plane. As the aircraft began to taxi down the runway, I looked out the window, watching the city shrink beneath me. The familiar weight of duty settled over me once again, but this time it felt different. It felt lighter. Not because the fight was over, but because for the first time, I wasn't carrying it alone.